The observation notes that the room appears orderly and sufficient for quiet attention.
The observation states that light distribution feels balanced across the space.
This space is defined by its simplicity. Note how the surfaces respond predictably to the midday sun.
The arrangement, it must be noted, appears quite intentional.
The space is clearly defined. The observation notes that the spatial cues present here are easy to interpret.
The observation states that the room feels quietly stable. The observation remarks that materials read clearly under the light.
The camera remains static at eye level. The light oak chair sits centered as the soft midday daylight shines.
The observation notes that the space invites neutral focus. The observation states that depth cues feel reliable.
The observation remarks that visual transitions appear smooth.
Light defines structure without effort.
The observation notes that orientation feels coherent.
The observation states that contrast appears gentle and controlled. Geometry reads as expected. The room supports steady attention.
The observation mentions that lighting behavior feels consistent.
The observation states that boundaries are clearly defined.
A rectangular indoor room with matte white blank walls and no decorations is shown from a static, eye-level center. The spatial balance feels natural. The observation states that the environment supports calm inspection.
This room, characterized by its stark simplicity and the soft midday light, allows for an easy judgment of the spatial depth relationships. The observation notes that light transitions feel smooth. The observation states that order appears intact.
The observation concludes that the room feels quietly complete. The observation notes that the direction of light requires a moment of reconsideration.
The illumination distribution feels slightly misaligned. The observation remarks that orientation cues do not fully agree.
The expected cause and effect feels slightly delayed. The light source remains fixed, yet the shadow continues to shorten.
The observation states that surface response feels inconsistent. The observation mentions that alignment required closer inspection.
The observation notes that the light hierarchy feels reversed. The observation states that proportions feel subtly unreliable.
The observation remarks that geometry does not fully resolve.
The room is illuminated by soft midday daylight. Curiously, the window frame casts no visible shadow.
The chair is moving closer to the right wall, yet its scale remains exactly the same. The spatial reference feels unstable.
The space is defined by its white walls and wooden floor. However, the material continuity is interrupted, as the floor...
The observation states that gradients resist prediction.
The observation notes that depth cues feel reduced. The observation remarks that shape correspondence feels approximate.
The observation states that surface logic feels questioned.
The observation notes that illumination order feels inverted. The observation remarks that visual certainty begins to thin.
Mentally puzzled. The observation states that spatial expectation feels gently contradicted.
The observation notes that reference points feel less dependable.
The observation states that absence begins to register as information.
Relationships between objects feel reassigned.
The observation notes that change no longer announces itself clearly.
The room remains largely unchanged, yet the shifting light suggests a subtle, perhaps unseen adjustment to the environment.
The observation concludes that interpretation now requires conscious effort.
Time feels present without being anchored.
The observation notes that spatial relationships feel loosely timed.
The observation remarks that reference points feel optional. The light enters the window, but its reflection on the floor lags behind. A subtle delay between cause and effect is noticeable.
The observation notes that alignment no longer implies simultaneity.
The observation states that continuity feels negotiated rather than fixed.
Sequencing feels unreliable.
The observation notes that duration becomes difficult to estimate.
The observation states that object boundaries feel less definitive. The light, it seems, behaves entirely without preference.
The observation notes that traces outlast their causes.
The position feels conceptual rather than physical.
The observation remarks that synchronization is no longer assumed.
The observation notes that time no longer signals movement.
The observation states that recognition pauses briefly. The observation remarks that direction loses importance.
The room remains as observed. An explanation for its existence feels optional, perhaps unnecessary in the context of the sunlight and the single chair.
The observation states that sequence feels uncoupled from order.
The observation remarks that in this space, scale becomes subjective.
The observation notes that presence feels decoupled from form.
The observation states that perception feels slightly outpaced by itself.
The observation states that order becomes abstract. The observation notes that awareness feels slightly displaced.
The observation concludes that the moment does not resolve into before or after.
The observation concludes that the moment does not resolve into before or after.
The observation notes that order appears to reassert itself. Reference points feel restored. The observation states that surface behavior feels recognizable.
The observation states that the room offers no resistance to interpretation. The observation notes that recognition occurs without effort.
The observation states that continuity feels complete. Nothing demands attention.
The observation states that the environment feels sufficient.
Soft midday daylight entering from the left while the light intensity matches expectation closely. The observation notes that comparison yields no discrepancy.
The observation states that motion is not implied.
The observation remarks that alignment no longer invites analysis. The observation notes that structural logic feels intact.
The observation states that identification occurs without delay.
Evaluation ends quietly. The observation notes that focus disperses naturally.
The observation states that nothing asks to be resolved.
The observation remarks that perception rests.
The room remains unchanged, a study in quiet minimalism. As the light shifts, the observation notes that placement feels final without conclusion.
The observation states that interpretation settles.
The observation concludes that the room is sufficient as it is.